Our buddy and our friend, Dr. Jason Johnson, senior politics editor for politic365.com. Hello, Doc.
I'm doing good. How are you today, Steve?
Good. I'm doing well as well. Okay, let's give a listen. Earlier in the week, Clarence Thomas made some remarks. Actually, by now, if this is Tuesday, it was probably last week he made these remarks about whether or not he ever thought he would live to see a black president. And here's what he had to say. Cut
I always thought there would be black coaches, black heads of universities. Maybe, again, as I said, I'm naive. But the thing that I knew that it would have to be a black president who was approved by the elites, the media, because anybody they didn't agree with, they would take apart. And that will happen with virtually, you pick your person, any black person who says something that is not the prescribed things that they expect from a black person will be picked apart. You can pick anybody. Don't pick me. Pick anyone who has decided not to go along with it. There's a price to pay. So I always assumed it would be somebody the media had to agree with.
Right, and again, those remarks actually were made about a month ago, I think in Duquesne Law School, or regardless, it was on C-SPAN. And so what do you think of what he had to say? You agree?
Oh, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. You know, this is why I think it's so funny when anyone says, "Oh, well, the elites had to pick them, and the press had to agree." What president isn't selected by elites? I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. And more importantly, this idea that, well, the liberal press, that's what he's saying, the liberal press has to accept one because supposedly the liberal press has that so much power. The same thing is said about college professors, right? We're all supposedly liberals and we control the minds of our students, and yet Reagan got elected and Bush got elected. So, I think it's a bunch of nonsense. Clarence Thomas is entitled to believe what he wants to believe. But I think he's wrong, and there's really not much empirical evidence to back up what he said.
Oh, there's plenty of empirical evidence, and let's start with Alan Keyes. I was working at ABC, division of ABC News at the time, doing some freelance work on the day, I believe it was a Sunday, when Alan Keyes announced for the presidency, becoming the first black to run for the presidential nomination. This is way back in the 90s at some point. I don't remember exactly when. Maybe I don't remember. Maybe 90. I don't remember exactly when. Point is, nobody, not one network covered it. When Jesse Jackson ran for the presidency, it was worldwide coverage because the media couldn't give a rat's behind about Alan Keyes, because Alan Keyes, this is what Clarence Thomas Justice Thomas was alluding to, is that any black, including himself, Condoleezza Rice, Michael Steele, Alan Keyes, you go right down the list, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, they are portrayed. Sarah Palin, conservative women, once she was selected, the head of Now said she might as well be a white male because she's not one of us. They're treated as traitors. It's the most racist, bigoted thing I've ever seen, but that's how it is, and Clarence Thomas is 100% right.
He's completely wrong, and I can give you a perfect example. Number one, you take a look at Jesse Jackson versus Alan Keyes. Jesse Jackson was already famous. Jesse Jackson had been involved with Martin Luther King. Most people did not know who Alan Keyes was. And let me tell you something else about it.
First African-American to seek the Republican presidential nomination. Is it newsworthy, my friend?
Jesse Jackson was an internationally known figure.
Who cares?
Something else about Alan Keyes.
Who cares?
I'm not saying that he wasn't a qualified guy or anything else like that. His own party wanted to ignore him.
We're talking about the news media coverage, and Clarence Thomas said the news media, the elite media, would have to sign off.
Whether Alan Keyes was successful. And let me tell you another example. You look at somebody like Clarence Thomas, and again, and I think it's sort of naive, again, this sort of assumption that people are sort of ordained by the media or press. There are lots of people in the press who happen to be Democrats. There are lots of people in the press who happen to be liberal, and yet Republicans still get elected. They get elected to Congress. They still get elected to the presidency of the United States of all colors. Michael Steele got elected. Jennifer Carroll got elected. So this idea that black people can only make it so far because there's this mythical monolithic media that prevents them from being successful, I think that's crazy.
Well, he was talking about the presidency specifically. He wasn't talking about the congressional level. He wasn't even talking about the state level. He was talking about the presidency, and we've already seen
it didn't work for Al Sharpton. It didn't work for Carol Moseley Brown.
Al Sharpton was a man who's called Jews Diamond. And you know what? It has worked for Al Sharpton. Not that he's won the presidency, but if you, wait. Let's talk about Al Sharpton. You brought him up. If a white person had ever perpetuated the Tawana Brawley hoax in reverse, if a white person had ever called Greeks homos, Jews diamond merchants, and white people opening a business in Harlem interlopers, but instead maybe in Bensonhurst on 86th Street called them black interlopers, and subsequently that store was burnt down and 7 people were killed. Do you think that man would ever be welcomed on the Republican stage running for president? Do you think he'd have a TV show and a radio show? Do you think
I don't know. You'd have to ask me about Pat.
Really? You don't know? Okay.
He says the same thing.
What's that?
He had a job for years on television.
Who?
Pat Buchanan has pretty much said the same thing.
That is an absolute lie. There is absolutely no analogy between Pat Buchanan. What store? What store owner? What store? Wait.
Stick to what was talking about.
Don't tell me what to stick to. You brought up Al Sharpton, and I'm
wasn't successful. He wasn't successful.
Al Sharpton is a successful radio host, television host, so-called recognized by the same elite media as a civil rights leader. How could someone be a civil rights leader who said all those horrific things and called all those people names based on ethnicity?
I'm not responsible for Al Sharpton's success.
Nobody's saying you are. The media that Clarence Thomas was talking about is
presidency, and he said, I didn't think any black person would get into that position unless they were approved by the elites and they were oppressed. Well, Al Sharpton wasn't approved by anybody. Carol Moseley Braun wasn't successful either. Colin Powell decided not to run.
You're missing the whole point. And the whole point is that whenever there is a black, Hispanic, or female who comes to the national scene for national office or higher office, they are portrayed as traitors, as something wrong with them.
That was not the case with Colin Powell.
That was never the case. Say again?
That was not the case with Colin Powell.
No.
Had Colin Powell run for president in the year 2000, he probably could have won. People wanted, Colin Powell is a Republican. Colin Powell
is a Republican who voted for Obama. Come on, you got to do better than that.
He voted for Obama in 2008 for the previous 20-something years. The guy he was in Republican administration.
But he didn't run for president. So I don't know why you're bringing him up. He didn't run for president.
To back up what Clarence Thomas is saying, other than his own warped view of politics, and that's fine for him to believe that. Really? But there's really evidence.
The media doesn't lambast and tear apart conservative women, blacks, and Hispanics, huh? They're not doing it to Marco Rubio right now, huh?
There are members of the press who are incredibly critical of all sorts of people. But if you're talking about pundits or journalists, we're talking about two different things. And if you talk about Barack Obama, trust me, it ain't like Barack Obama got to skate all the way through. He was asked about Reverend Wright. He was asked about all sorts of comments in his past, and he still ended up winning the presidency in large part because he ran a better campaign than John McCain.
He was hardly held to the same standard as George Bush. He admitted in Jason, we're talking to Jason Johnson, by the way, senior politics editor for Politic365.com on the Steve Malzberg Show. George Bush, when there was an unnamed accusation in a book, an unattributed source, that he had used cocaine, it was the story. Barack Obama, in his own words, has 2 books where, in his own words, where he reads the audio version, talking about all the drugs he did. How he would lock the doors of the van to inhale those fumes, baby, and how he wasted his years on drugs. You tell me which media outlet ever addressed that. I'd like to know.
Well, one, it was actually covered by most news outlets. But if you're talking about because everyone talked about his book. But again, if you're going to
No. When he was running, these books were written before his run for the presidency. Where was the coverage and scrutiny of that?
When he ran for president, his books were covered. But again, I want to get back because
you don't want to address this. I see. Okay.
I think it's very important if you speak about what Clarence Thomas was saying, because as an African American and a political intellectual, I also have a real problem with his suggestion, and I think it's whining. And I think it's
Whiny.
disingenuous.
The man was high-technically lynched by the likes of Joe Biden and Ted Kennedy.
He got in trouble. He got in trouble because he sexually harassed someone and got busted.
Really? Yeah. You know, you
the
see,
fact of the matter
let
is,
me tell
he
you
still
something.
got
Let me
through.
tell you something. Let me tell you.
Got through. He still has a job for life. So
Let me tell you
what
something.
is he complaining about?
Clarence Thomas, to this day, is lambasted by the elites in the media as dumb, doesn't ask questions,
Because he
can't
was on-
write
because he was on the
anything,
bench for 10
doesn't
years.
know how to do his job
He was on the bench for a
because he's
decade.
a black
Lead
conservative, and the
That's
media can't
Sir,
take it.
And the truth of the matter is, look, if you want to say that African Americans who are conservative are somehow mythically and always attacked, fine, I guess people can believe that if that's what they want to believe. But it doesn't appear, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as African American Republicans that I know and my friends, and when I'm at the RNC and when I see people running in different kinds of offices, there are many, many black people who have been successful running for office.
Now you're taking it off the national scene again. I'm talking about
There's only
national
one
level.
President, we're talking about a 0.0% sample size. So the election of Barack
0.0%
Obama
sample
means
size.
that the press hates every black person who's ever run. That doesn't make sense.
Do you remember when Condoleezza Rice had her confirmation hearings and she was treated like garbage, and the cartoons that ran in newspapers portrayed her as Aunt Jemima and sucking up to George W. Bush? Did she deserve that? Was she guilty of sexual harassment too?
We are talking about certain media outlets to paint the entire media in a broad brush. Steve, that would be like comparing
Did you object to that?
every
Did you
single
object to that?
person out there who's out there, and that's not the case.
Did you object to that at the time?
Individual.
Did you object to that at the time?
Of course I did. I don't think anybody should be portrayed as an Aunt Jemima. But
Oh, okay.
I don't think that all of the press engages in any type of behavior one way or another. In the
All right,
end,
well, let me play something. Do we have the hold it, don't go away. I want to okay. The Mika Brzezinski cut.
Yeah.
You know, because the chairman of the South Carolina Democratic Party, Dick Harpootlian, made vulgar remarks about Nikki Haley in 2012, called her Hitler's lover, or the same as Hitler's lover and mistress, and then said she should go back to wherever the hell she came from. And I could play you the cut right now if we could find it. We played it before, and we will, of Mika Brzezinski and everyone on Morning Joe admitting that if this had been a Republican who said this about a person of color who was a Democrat, they would have led with it. They would have been talking about it all morning, and it would have been the story of the day all over. But because it was a Democrat saying it about a Republican female of ethnic persuasion, not as big a deal. They admit it. You disagree with them?
They can have whatever kind of opinion they want.
So they're wrong, too.
Unless Joe Scarborough can represent, just like Clarence
Wasn't
Thomas.
Joe Scarborough.
Clarence
He wasn't
Thomas
there. It was
doesn't
Mika.
represent every single African-American Republican, and Joe Scarborough can't speak for the entire media.
Well,
and
no, it wasn't Joe. Here, let's play the bite. Let's play the bite. Go ahead.
So, let me just say, fair enough. That if a Republican did this, we'd be covering it like crazy. So we're covering it because it was wrong, and those statements were absolutely wrong. I don't care what he meant. He should just say he regrets it. Agreed? Anyone disagree?
Yeah,
Ridiculous.
He's a good man, but he has a history of making floppy remarks, and
That's
he
a
should probably
gaffe at
say something
best.
different.
Yeah, and say that.
Yeah.
How about just, I'm really sorry. That was the wrong choice of words, and I am so sorry.
Betty says it today.
What, yeah.
I bet he does.
I think he might.
But you're right, Mika. Role play that. Flip the roles.
Oh, my Lord. Republican?
The head of the Republican Party in the state
They
of
eviscerated.
We would have led with it.
Yeah, we would have.
We would have led with it.
That's the entire, that's not Joe. Joe wasn't there. That's the entire liberal cast of his show. Mike Barnacle, the guy from Time Magazine, Mika, admitting that if it were the other way around, that would be big news, baby. But the way this way,
Well, first and foremost, again, I'm speaking in terms of, are we going to generalize the entire press because of the behavior of a certain number of people? Look, the guy made a racist statement. He actually should have been out of a job, as far as I'm concerned. I don't care who you are, if you're a Republican or Democrat. I feel the same thing about the guy in Kansas. I feel the same way about a lot of idiotic things that Joe Biden has said. But at the core, if we get back to this idea that African Americans somehow, and this is something else that I find particularly problematic about what Clarence Thomas says. There are plenty of African Americans who are Republicans who have had positions of influence in the party. And the fact that you happen to have one guy who ends up being president of the United States does not in some shape, way, or form mean that the press is constantly attacking and making it impossible for any black person to run. And I think that if you look at somebody like Colin Powell, if you look at again, he never decided he wanted to run for president, but you look at somebody like J.C. Watts. I mean, J.C. Watts was incredibly loved by the press. But I think the issue is that a guy like Clarence Thomas, because of his own arrogance, and I will say his own arrogance, wants to believe that he's special, and he wants to believe that he's the only African-American Republican in the entire world, and he wants to believe that he's the only African-American Republican who's ever been criticized for anything, rather than taking responsibility for some of his own behavior and his own mistakes.
Wow.
Because the same thing would not be applicable to somebody like Michael Steele, who's not only gone on to be very, very successful, but had a position of national prominence. And Michael Steele wasn't torn down by the media, whatever mythical
Michael Steele had Oreo cookies thrown at him, and worse, while he was running for the Senate in his state, and the media would never report on that.
I'm from Maryland. I lived in Maryland. I remember that being covered. I don't know.
Okay.
I can't speak for every single media outlet. Trust me, I was there. I
right.
remember seeing that being covered. It was covered in the D.C. media.
Jason, we got to leave it there, my friend. But as always, I thank you for the spirited debate. We'll talk to you again.
Thank you.
All right, Jason Johnson, ladies and gentlemen.